One of the reasons I've always loved playing Modern is because you can tell where the Modern metagame is at just by looking at one deck. That's something that not a lot of people are able to do in any other format. I mean, maybe in Commander, if you see the playability of Dockside Extortionist go up, then, you know, that's been this whole little conversation on the side. But I want to stick to the Modern idea of what it means to be a metagame. And you could go to your favorite aggregate website of choice. It could be MTG Goldfish, MTG Top 8. But it's not just about looking at the metagame. It's really just looking at the composition of the decks being played and the archetypes themselves. You have the aggro decks, you have the control decks, and you have the combo decks at the top, with Nadu ruling the roost with its bird powers. Not a lot of people still want to play it, and that might seem a little counterintuitive based on the metagame percentages. Nadu is the most played deck. It is the most powerful deck right now, but especially with the banned and restricted announcement coming just around the corner on August 26th, not a lot of people want to invest in a deck that is honestly overblown in terms of price, but also just gonna get banned really soon. They don't want to, you know, spend the time learning it. They don't want to invest into it and just lose all the pieces, because a lot of those pieces aren't really transferable into maybe something like Yawgmoth or another creature combo deck that is, I would say, playable in terms of being like a tier 2 1.51 deck. So why bother playing it? So at the league level on MTGO and at the LGS level, you probably don't see Nadu too much. I mean, let me know what you see in the comment section down below. At the locals that I've been to, the folks that I talk to, they just don't see Nadu in any way, shape, or form when it comes to that. And so with that, it's interesting to see it still be at the top when it comes to competitions with Modern challenges and big tournaments that happen. People still have, as a grinder, that investment time, because they will learn that matchup. They will do whatever it's possible to gain that high EV. So it's always this contention, and it kind of shows you what it really means to be a metagame. It's kind of just what people are winning with. It's not necessarily what people are playing. Because what people are playing are maybe the 3-1 decks, the 4-1 decks, the 2-1 decks, whatever it might be, whatever you're playing at your LGS level. It's not necessarily the highly competitive stuff. And that's where Modern is at right now, because the signpost deck that can allow you to see what's going on in the metagame, honestly, no personal bias whatsoever, even though my name is That Mill Guy, is Modern Mill. And that's because based on its composition, it can be built to beat aggro, it could be built to beat control, it could be built to beat kind of combo, or it could be built to go all in if mid-range is at the top. Because naturally speaking, the deck itself is a mid-range deck. It is not combo control, or necessarily it's not combo, it's not control. It could be seen as combo control. I'm happy to accept that back and forth, but it's largely a mid-range deck. It tries to 1-for-1 you, but the 1-for-1 is at an angle that largely isn't that relevant when it comes to resource management in the game of Magic. It deals with the most random aspect of the battlefield, or the game state, I should say, and that is the library. That is a resource management system. You can go 1-for-1 in terms of spells, but the value you get by milling over 13 cards isn't really that relevant in terms of the value of someone casting a Tarmogoyf or a Grief double scamming you on turn 1. That has more value to it. Even though they may have fetched to do that double kind of Grief turn on you, if you double Archive trap your opponent, you still got a 4/3 coming at you in terms of their life, and you still got half their library to go at, and you've lost some of your very important resources to make that happen. So this is where Mill looks to adapt. And right now, Mill is in a place where kind of Azorius has taken the top of the roost. And it's interesting to see, because Dimir is no longer relevant, with Fatal Push being harder to enable at a lower end, just being really necessary with a lot of the recursion in the Modern metagame as well. We see cards like Flayed really kind of advise the removal that Mill needs to play. Path to Exile is really relevant right now. Prismatic Ending, destroying low-cost permanents like Shuko, is also extremely relevant as well. So these are the type of things that Mill needs to do to adapt, and especially now with what I feel like is a change in the delta of life loss in Modern, because Modern feels like it's not at that stage of incremental life loss. It feels all or nothing. It's not like you're losing 3 damage, 3 damage, 3 damage when burn is good in the Modern metagame. It feels like you just lose or you're still up, because winning at 1 life is the same as winning at 20. It's one of the most basic kind of brain switch moments that average Magic players have, or I should say beginning Magic players have, especially when it comes to upping their competitive prowess. And so with that, we see that Mill has shifted away from life gain. Crypt Incursion is no longer relevant if you're not playing black. It's all about the removal. Maybe you're playing Leyline of Sanctity. And that kind of brings about the idea of what it means to be a board wipe. Because if you're not taking incremental damage, then maybe creatures aren't really swinging at you from a wide board, where you have to make the choice of, do I Fatal Push the Tarmogoyf or do I Fatal Push the Ragavan? Where the Ragavan might take a card that I desperately need, or the Tarmogoyf might just turn this into a 2-turn clock. Chances are you kill the Tarmogoyf there, I'm going to be honest. But there are situations where things like that matter, especially if you're kind of hoping to preordain for a certain card and leave that on top and kind of sequence things. So there's always ways that you want to make these type of choices, but that type of board wipe isn't that relevant anymore. Damnation isn't as playable right now because, again, if the board is full, it's probably because your opponent just living ended and they brought back their whole graveyard. You're not really going to get a chance to board wipe necessarily, especially with that graveyard bringing back Grief now. Yeah, you're not getting that. Supreme Verdict, though, I will say, still a relevant counterspell, a very powerful counterspell, which is one of the primary reasons why the Mardu control deck, the energy control deck, is very important. I shouldn't say Mardu control. Mardu is more so for the aggro decks, playing Boros energy, but with like Orcish Bowmasters, maybe Rakdos sideboard cards. But when it comes to something like board wipes, you have something very interesting with Toxic Deluge in the sideboards of Modern Mill. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it really doesn't feel like many other black decks are playing Toxic Deluge. Is that really the best option you have? I mean, the life loss is actually really relevant because, again, if you're not losing life incrementally, you can't afford the time and the resources to maybe pay 8, 9, 10 life if you really need to. Well, if you're paying 10 life, Lord help you if you're paying 10 life. That's all I'll say. But, you know, usually you're paying somewhere in the range of maybe like 4 to 6 life on average, I would say, to kind of get the top end of creatures that are coming your way. And so that's okay. But then when it gets countered, when it gets interacted with, that's when things get tricky. And so Ensnaring Bridge has actually been really bad for a very long time as well. Ensnaring Bridge has been that kind of quote unquote prison piece that Mill has had to take advantage of. It's been one of the best cards against a Murktide matchup, especially for years, because Murktide largely, once you resolve Ensnaring Bridge, has like maybe somewhere in the range of 1 to 3 ways to deal with Ensnaring Bridge, especially post-board. Maybe it's like one artifact removal spell. Maybe it's like an Otawara. Maybe if it's like that, oh, I'm forgetting the name of it, but the blue 1 fairy from Eldraine, and then you can pay 2 and then you bounce a permanent. I'm forgetting the name of it, but y'all know in the comment section. Y'all are great with reminding me of the names of those cards, so let me know in the comment section. But those are generally the options. But Ensnaring Bridge is not great in a combo-centric meta where, again, you lose all your life or none, or your opponent's just kind of winning themselves. Heck, they might Thassa's Oracle themselves. And the control decks, it's kind of just not relevant at all. You'd rather just be playing Path to Exile with your White Splash to get rid of Flage, because the kind of threats they have are really just largely what? Solitude, Flage, maybe like a creature land or some other threat like Snapcaster Mage, because, you know, the boomers always love their bad recursion spells. But things like that are what advise the removal package and sideboards on Modern Mill. And if Ensnaring Bridge is bad, board wipes are bad, and removal is king, that means that the metagame is all or nothing. It's very important to be removing key pieces. Path to Exile has to be the best card you're playing, because in an exile effect, it doesn't require any condition to meet it to exile cards that are, you know, 4 CMC or greater, which is great. You don't need to hold up fetches. You don't need to have a Path to, or not a Path to Exile, a Field of Ruin ready to enable it. You just Path. And what's nice about Path as well is that subsequently it is a enabling piece for something like Archive Trap. So you get that search out of there if your opponent wants to be greedy, grab their land and advance their board state. I'm getting you to mill 13 plus cards at the bare minimum. I mean, you take a basic out there, it's kind of like Archive Traps milling 14 cards for free when you really think about it. It's all about getting cards out of your opponent's deck. And if Leyline of Sanctity is then going to replace those slots, that means you don't want to be targeted by Grief. If Burn is coming at you, you don't want to be targeted as well. It's all very relevant, and the pieces coming together start to tell a story. Surgical Extraction has been one of the best cards in this metagame for a very long time, and has been the calling piece for Mill. Surgical Extraction single-handedly, in my opinion, has been holding up the power of Mill for years now, and is so right now. It low-key is one of the best cards out right now, and one of the primary reasons you would be playing Dimir is if you wanted extra copies of Surgical, you'd just be playing Extirpate in the sideboard. Honestly, I don't see a reason why you'd be playing Dimir at this point other than Extirpate. Crypt Incursion, again, less relevant than before, because these days you're losing all all your life or none. Heck, even Boros Energy is just trying to overwhelm you with a wide board a lot of the times. You're just going to be losing a hyperbolic kind of amount of life at every single turn. It's not you're losing 2 damage every turn to a Ragavan or 4 damage every turn to maybe like a Goyf. You're losing 2, then you're losing 4, then you're losing 10, then you're losing 30. Like it gets way too out of hand when it comes to the Boros Energy deck, especially with their versatility in the energy package. I will also give a shout out on that note to the energy package. Big shout out to Wizards of the Coast for actually enabling and making a package like that work in Modern. It's actually really exciting to see that old, I guess, like fan favorite mechanics come back and not be sequestered to forgotten formats like Kaladesh and just be able to come in and be playable in an Eternal format like this. So big shout out to them for making that a centerpiece for Modern Horizons 3 and making that playable. So I'm really happy to see Boros Energy and kind of Boros Control at the top, albeit Boros Control is kind of just a one ring deck if we're all trying to be honest with ourselves. I'm just saying. But one ring aside, it's important to note that with the way Mill adapts, we see how the Modern metagame has changed. We see that when it comes to hard removal, when it comes to lack of control, when the format isn't incrementally hitting you in the face, then Mill goes Azorius. Mill goes more extreme with its answers. It's very all or nothing in its answers. It's not just about having variability. You don't play Stinctus Stupor as a 1-out for your land or your bounce spell. You don't play Echoing Truth as a catch-all. You don't play Crypt Incursion for value in your main board. You play Path to Exile, you play Prismatic, and you go all in on your mono blue Mill. That's kind of the scary thing. Does that mean it's a good thing? Do you find the Modern metagame good right now? I mean, if Nadu truly was everywhere in your Modern leagues and your locals, would you find that good at all? Have many of you actually played against Nadu enough? Do you actually perceive it to be a problem? And I feel like you don't. The average player probably doesn't, because you haven't played it against it enough, because people don't want to invest into it. It's about to go. And Modern's in a really interesting place because of it. For the large majority of players, it's a healthy place. It's a very diverse metagame. And that's what I generally see. I don't play a lot of competitive events. I follow them, but I play a lot of leagues, and I play, every so often at the LGS as well. That's where you get a little bit of variation. You can kind of play a game where you don't have to deal with Nadu. If you play against Nadu in the league, you take the L, but largely speaking, people are prepared for the deck, but like, why? It's not really that relevant when it comes to those levels. The vast majority of Magic players are either playing Commander, but when it comes to Constructed, they're not playing against Nadu. So does it even matter to play against it? I mean, Mill thinks it is, because it kind of has to, right? Like, it's a combo deck. It's one of its best matchups, so it has to adapt to it. So if you see Mill players playing white, if you see Mill players playing more Surgical's main board, maybe the Modern metagame isn't that great.